All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving into something absolutely profound. We're going to explore a deeply insightful philosophical text known as the Hatime, which is actually a concluding section from a much larger body of work. And listen, we're going to be tackling a deeply, fundamentally human problem today. How we process our own mortality, how we get so tangled up in worldly attachments, and honestly, why we try so hard to avoid deep, uncomfortable truths. The text we're looking at gives us this incredibly visual, structured way to understand our own psychology through a spiritual lens. It's all about what happens when we view the world with a super narrow focus and how just a simple shift in perspective can literally change everything.
So, to kick things off, I want you to ask yourself a question. Have you ever completely ignored an undeniable reality? Just hoping it would somehow magically disappear? We have all done it, right? Maybe it's a huge exam you haven't studied for, or a really difficult conversation you need to have, or even just a stack of bills sitting on the kitchen counter. But what about the biggest reality of the whole shebang? What about death itself? Sometimes we actually trick ourselves into believing that if we just squeeze our eyes shut and refuse to think about it, the threat just vanishes.
And that brings us to part 1, escaping reality. Now, escaping reality is a totally universal psychological defense mechanism. We operate under this weird, false assumption that if we can't see the danger, it just ceases to exist. I mean, we find the comforts of our everyday lives so sweet that we actively avoid looking at absolutely anything that might ruin that vibe. But as you'll see, ignoring reality doesn't actually change reality. In our source material, this specific state of mind has a name. It's called goflet, which roughly translates to heedlessness. Basically, heedlessness is the state of willfully ignoring undeniable realities, specifically death and the afterlife, simply to avoid the anxiety they bring up. It's essentially self-induced blindness. And before we can solve a problem, we got to define it. So this concept of heedlessness is really the philosophical anchor for everything we're going to unpack today.
Moving on to part 2, the ostrich analogy.
To really wrap our heads around how kind of absurd this state of heedlessness is, the text uses a brilliant and honestly slightly humorous metaphor. Let's break down the mechanics of the ostrich. Okay, so on one side we have the ostrich's perception. It spots a hunter, realizes it can't fly away, and in a total panic, it buries its head in the sand. In the bird's mind, because its eyes are close to the hunter is gone. It feels totally safe. But then, consider the stark reality. Its entire, massive body remains completely exposed and totally visible. The danger hasn't changed one bit, literally only the bird's awareness of it has. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is captured in this one really powerful phrase. It doesn't see, but the hunter does. And man, this connects directly back to human nature. When we plunge our heads into the sand of our daily distractions just to avoid thinking about mortality, we aren't actually protecting ourselves. Running away from the reality of death and the afterlife doesn't magically grant us immunity from them. We are just as exposed. Only now, we're entirely unprepared. Which brings us to our next major concept. Part 3. Two travelers in a temporary village.
This is a highly relatable, kind of amazing parable about two very different guys living in a temporary village. It's a thought experiment that forces us to look at how our internal beliefs totally dictate our external experiences. Let's set the scene here. Imagine a small, temporary rest stop. Almost everyone you know, like 99% of your friends and loved ones, has already packed up their bags and departed for a beautiful, vibrant destination. Let's say the magnificent city of Istanbul. They are living a great life there. Meanwhile, you are left behind in this temporary village with literally only one friend remaining, and you both know, for a fact, that you'll have to make that exact same journey very soon.
Now, notice the stark contrast between the two men left in this village. The first man, he truly believes his departed friends are happily living it up in Istanbul. His reaction to leaving? He's super excited to go. When he's told it's his time to travel, he rejoices at the impending reunion. The second man, however, believes anyone who leaves the village is just lost, destroyed, gone forever. Because of this terrifying worldview, he is in absolute agony. He desperately clings to that last remaining guest in the village, trying to numb his pain, even though deep down he knows this guest is going to leave him too.
Let's move to part 4, reunion, not destruction.
So what does this village parable actually represent for us in our own lives? It's time to lift the veil on this metaphor and decode it together. The temporary village, that represents the world we currently live in. The departed friends represent our loved ones who have passed away. And that beautiful destination, Istanbul, represents the afterlife. When we view death through the lens of faith, much like that first man did, we realize that departure is not absolute destruction. No way. It is a journey of reunion. It's reconnecting with those who have just traveled a little further ahead of us.
And that leads to part 5, hope within the pain.
Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, that's a really nice philosophical thought, but losing someone still hurts. Incredibly deeply. And you know what? You are absolutely right. The source text is actually highly empathetic to this. Separation is not painless, but hope enters the pain. When we lose someone, we still weep. We still miss their presence in our daily lives, for sure. But adopting the mindset of that first man injects a profound, luminous sense of hope directly into that grief. It basically transforms a dark, bottomless despair into more of a bittersweet longing.
So how do we actually apply this in the real world? Well, the text offers a very practical shift in mindset. Let's walk through these steps together. First, think of a loved one you have lost or deeply miss. Got them in mind? Okay, second, catch yourself when you speak about them. We need to stop defining their absence with the harsh, heavy finality of phrases like gone forever or Arctic yoke. Instead, step 3 is to remember them with a totally new consciousness.
And that new consciousness is beautifully captured right here. Entrusted to divine mercy. Think about that. When you actively change your vocabulary to this phrase, it literally changes your psychology. This is the ultimate solution to the agonizing despair felt by that second man in our village metaphor. Your loved ones aren't lost in a void. They are entrusted to a merciful guardian waiting at the destination. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we are basically left looking at two very clear, contrasting paths. On one hand, we have heedlessness, and that operates purely on fear. It squeezes its eyes shut, buries its head in the sand like the ostrich, and completely avoids reality. On the other hand, we have faith. Faith doesn't run away from the scary things. It actually teaches us how to look directly at the grave and directly at death without flinching or running away, because it provides the vital context that transforms an ending into a transition. And that brings us to our final thought for this explainer. I really want you to take a second and reflect on this. Which reality are you turning your eyes away from right now? Because whether it's just a small daily truth or the ultimate destination that every single one of us is traveling toward, true peace doesn't come from hiding in the sand. It comes from having the courage and the right framework to finally open your eyes. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I truly hope this gives you a powerful new perspective to carry forward. See you next time.